get out of my cockpit! I won't risk 300 lives on a diversity experiment!
Captain Grant Mercer blocked the right seat, then seized the intercom. Nearly 300 passengers heard him describe the black first officer as part of a corporate image campaign. Every face turned toward Simone Carter. Phones rose. She had nearly 4,000 hours on that aircraft, but Grant had refused to open her record.
Name one unsafe thing I've done, or say the real reason you won't fly with me.
The cabin went dead silent. Minutes later, an operations director stepped aboard and ordered one pilot removed from command. Grant smiled, certain the order was meant for Simone. A September rain had settled quietly over Toronto Pearson before sunrise. Beyond the glass, Liberty Crest Flight 420 waited at the gate, the Seattle route glowing across the departure board. Liberty Crest was a U.S.-based carrier with a major operating base at Toronto Pearson. American pilot Simone Carter stepped through the cockpit door 40 minutes before departure, with rain darkening her uniform. Her inspection vest was folded over one arm. Her flight bag rested in the other hand. She had completed the exterior walk-around and reviewed the weather developing across the Great Lakes along the westbound route. Captain Grant Mercer sat in the left seat with one hand around a cup. He looked at her face first, then at the 3 gold stripes on her shoulders. Identification, he said. No greeting, no offered hand. Simone removed her badge and held it out. Grant took it from her, studied the photograph, employee number, and expiration date, then turned it over as if a second truth might be printed on the back. Simone watched without speaking. 5 minutes earlier, First Officer Daniel Walsh, a white pilot, assigned to another Liberty Crest flight, had stepped into the cockpit to discuss the revised weather routing with Grant. Grant had greeted him by name, joked about the rain, and let him lean across the center console without asking for identification. The difference was small enough to deny and clear enough to feel. Grant handed the badge back. "Open your assignment." Simone brought up the crew roster, aircraft qualification, and duty record on her tablet. Grant scanned the screen for 3 seconds. "You were added late. Crew scheduling assigned me last night," Simone said. "I reviewed the route, alternate airports, and weather package before I reported. Who pushed your name onto this flight?" The question carried more accusation than curiosity. Simone met his eyes. No one pushed it. Scheduling filled an open position through the normal system. Grant leaned back. His gaze moved over her uniform again. "That system has been making interesting choices lately." Simone felt pressure behind her ribs. She had heard the same tone in conference rooms, where people praised diversity before questioning whether she had earned the chair beneath her. "I have more than 8,000 flight hours," she said. "Nearly 4,000 on the 787. Is there something specific in my record you want to discuss?" Grant did not ask about her aircraft time. He lifted his flight bag and placed it squarely on the right seat. The gesture looked casual. It was not. This route needs steady hands, not a public relations decision. The cockpit seemed to shrink around the words. Rain ticked against the windshield. An amber service light slid across the instrument panel and vanished. Simone looked at the bag occupying her seat, then back at Grant. "Which qualification are you challenging?" "I've been doing this for 30 years. "That wasn't my question." His mouth tightened. "Experience teaches you things a file can't. Such as who belongs in a cockpit like this." Something cold moved through Simone's calm. She kept it out of her face. Anger would give him the story he wanted. Precision would leave him with his own words. She opened the crew irregularity report in the duty notes application. "Then enter your reason for refusing the assigned first officer." Grant laughed once. "You don't order a captain to explain himself. I'm asking you to document a decision affecting the flight." He reached for his coffee but did not drink. "You're proving my point." Simone held his gaze, then stated clearly, "Are you refusing to fly with me before reviewing my qualifications?" Silence pressed against the cockpit door. Grant glanced toward the right seat as if the bag had made the decision for him. "This aircraft will not leave Toronto with you sitting there." Simone nodded once. No argument, no threat. She entered the time and carefully typed his words as memory allowed. Grant saw only a woman preparing to leave. He did not notice how carefully she preserved the record. The silence after Grant's refusal lasted a few seconds, changing the shape of the cockpit. Simone did not reach for her bag. Instead, she turned the tablet toward him and opened the weather package. "Let's remove judgment from this," she said. "We can review the route together. Convective activity across Michigan and the upper Great Lakes, the fuel reserve, the diversion airports, and the wind forecast for Seattle. If I miss a critical item, I'll step off the flight and file a competency report myself." Grant stared at the screen without touching it. "I'm not auditioning someone management forced into my cockpit. Then this isn't about competency." His eyes hardened. "Careful." Simone kept her voice level. The radar display showed a growing band of storms pushing north and east, broad enough to disrupt the planned routing if it strengthened. Dispatch had sent an updated note moments earlier, recommending an additional 2,000 pounds of fuel. She tapped the message. "They're expecting deviations. Vancouver is available, but the coastal wind is shifting. Portland gives us more margin if Seattle closes an arrival corridor." Grant glanced at the recommendation and dismissed it with a flick of his hand. "The filed load is sufficient. It may be. The extra fuel protects us if the weather expands, and it adds another delay while they bring the truck back. They were already behind schedule." Grant wore that fact like an accusation against everyone but himself. Simone understood the pressure. She also knew punctuality stopped mattering the moment it began shaping a safety decision. "Then note my dissent in the operational record," she said. "You don't have a dissent, you have an opinion. A documented fuel recommendation from dispatch is more than an opinion." Grant leaned toward her. "You walked in here 10 minutes ago, and now you're trying to prove you're smarter than the captain." The cockpit door opened before Simone could answer. Linda Shore entered carrying a fresh cup of coffee, with Tessa Nguyen behind her in the galley. Linda slowed when she saw Grant's bag still occupying the right seat. "Everything all right?" she asked. Grant took the coffee. "She may have the hours, but she doesn't have the cockpit presence." Linda's expression barely moved, but Simone could tell she had heard the phrase before. She looked at Simone with the strained sympathy of someone hoping the wronged person would make the problem easier. "Maybe step outside for a few minutes," Linda said softly. "Let the atmosphere settle." Simone studied her. "Would you ask a white male first officer with the same record to wait outside until the captain felt comfortable?" Linda's fingers tightened around the empty tray. Her gaze dropped. She offered no answer. Behind her, Tessa lowered her eyes to the crew tablet and opened the safety reporting application. She entered the time, then typed the wording as accurately as she could. Grant reached for the scheduling handset. "Crew control, this is Mercer on Flight 418. I need a replacement first officer." The scheduler asked for the reason. Grant looked directly at Simone. Combative behavior, emotionally unsuitable for this cockpit. Simone had not raised her voice once. A pause followed. The scheduler offered Jamal Brooks, a black reserve first officer Grant had flown with twice. Grant rejected him before the scheduler could read his qualifications. No. Then came Eric Caldwell, a white male first officer Grant also knew, with fewer hours on the 787 than Simone. Grant answered immediately. "Send him." Tessa's thumb stopped over the screen. Linda's face lost color. Simone felt no satisfaction in being proven right, only a familiar weariness. The bias had moved from suggestion to record. The scheduler returned after checking the roster. "Captain Carter's assignment is marked non-substitutable. We cannot replace her without approval from Operations Control." Grant's gaze shifted to Simone's badge, then to her face. Suspicion entered where certainty had been. For one moment he could have stopped. Instead, he tightened his grip on the handset. "Then find someone with the authority." Flight 418 was 23 minutes behind schedule when the first passengers crossed the jet bridge. The delay had begun as a private conflict inside the cockpit, but Grant Mercer no longer wanted it private. A disagreement between two pilots could be reviewed. A frightened cabin could be used. Before crew control could place an operational hold on Flight 418, he stepped into the forward galley and told Linda to continue boarding. "Captain, we still don't have a confirmed first officer," she said. "We have one," Grant replied, glancing toward Simone. "We have the wrong one." Linda's face tightened, but she signaled the gate agent. Passengers enter beneath soft cabin lights, shaking rain from coats and lifting bags into overhead bins. Simone remained near the cockpit door, her flight tablet held against her side. She watched Grant greet several passengers with the polished confidence of a man preparing an audience. By the time the business class cabin was nearly full, close to 300 people were settling throughout the aircraft. Grant removed the interphone from its cradle. Linda reached toward him. Maybe operations should handle the explanation. Operations created the problem. He pressed the announcement key. His voice filled the cabin, smooth and controlled. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. Our departure is being held because corporate leadership has introduced an unplanned personnel experiment into the flight deck. Conversations stopped. Seatbelts paused halfway across laps. Grant continued. With unstable weather along our route, every decision matters. So I'll ask a simple question. When weather is unstable, do you want experience or a corporate image campaign? The words carried through every row. He never said Simone's name. He did not need to. Heads turned toward the black woman standing beside the cockpit in a pilot's uniform. A phone rose in row 2, then another near the aisle. Simone felt the attention settle over her skin, heavy and familiar. Grant had taken his private assumption and dressed it in the language of public safety. Leon Briggs watched from the first row. At 63, he had learned to hear what people avoided saying. Grant had offered no failed examination, no missing certification, no unsafe action, only suspicion wrapped in authority. Simone stepped forward after Grant lowered the handset. She did not reach for it. She did not raise her voice. Captain Mercer has not identified one error in my record, one missing qualification, or one unsafe decision, she said, loud enough for the front cabin to hear. He decided I was a risk before he reviewed any of them. A murmur moved between the seats. Grant's eyes sharpened. This, he said, gesturing toward her, is exactly what I mean. She cannot accept cockpit authority under pressure. Simone looked at him steadily. What exactly have I done that was unsafe? Grant answered too quickly. You refused to leave when instructed. Leon leaned forward. That is non-compliance with you. It is not evidence of incompetence. Grant turned toward him. Sir, remain seated and stay out of crew operations. Leon was already seated. He said nothing more. His phone had been recording since Grant raised the intercom. He kept the original video untouched and later added the time, Grant's wording, and Simone's response to a separate written statement. He did not mention that he had spent more than 2 decades flying commercial aircraft before training crews in accident prevention. Another passenger, a woman across the aisle, looked at Simone. Are you certified on this airplane? Yes, Simone said. Nearly 4,000 hours on the 787. Grant gave a humorless laugh. Connecticut's are paperwork. They don't replace command instinct. He faced the cabin again. This airline has created a new advancement program. I need a first officer who fits the traditional command profile, not someone promoted to satisfy a report. The cabin went quiet in a different way. Not confusion. Recognition. He had avoided mentioning race and gender while making both unmistakable. Simone saw discomfort move across Linda's face. Linda looked down at the carpet and said nothing. Near the galley, Tessa noticed a passenger holding a phone that had recorded Grant's entire announcement. She leaned close without touching the device. Please keep the original file, she whispered. Don't edit it, and don't remove the timestamp. The passenger nodded. Grant turned back toward the cockpit, certain he had made Simone harder for management to defend. Instead, he had created witnesses. Simone stepped into the jet bridge, where fluorescent light washed the walls pale gray. She used Liberty Crest's secure executive incident line to call Evelyn Hart. I found what my father warned us about, she said when Evelyn answered. Her voice remained controlled, though disappointment pressed beneath every word. But Grant is only one man. I need to see how many people will protect him. Simone stood halfway down the jet bridge, far enough from the aircraft door that Grant could not hear her, close enough to watch anyone entering or leaving. Rain streaked the narrow windows beside her. Beyond them, ground crews moved beneath the wing in reflective jackets while Liberty Crest Flight 418 remained fixed at the gate. Evelyn Hart answered on the second ring. "Tell me exactly what happened." Simone summarized the confrontation, emphasizing Grant's refusal to review her qualifications, his unequal replacement choice, and the announcement he had made before the passengers. Evelyn remained silent for several seconds. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. "I'm calling operations. He comes off the airplane now." "Not yet." "Simone, he publicly questioned your competence and placed the company at risk. He placed every pilot he judged this way at risk." The distinction mattered. 9 months earlier, after the death of Simone's father, Marcus Carter, she had inherited more than his controlling interest in Liberty Crest. In a locked drawer inside his Toronto office, she had found a folder he had never managed to resolve. It contained complaints from black pilots, women, Asian American and Latino pilots, and younger first officers assigned to a small circle of senior captains. None of the reports contained an obvious insult. The language was cleaner than that. "Lacks command presence, does not fit cockpit culture, too sensitive to feedback, challenges traditional authority, not ready to represent the airline." Each phrase sounded professional when read alone. Together, they formed a pattern no one had wanted to name. Several executives had told Simone the comments reflected personality conflicts, not bias. They argued that aviation depended on judgment, and judgment could not always be reduced to numbers. Yet those same vague remarks had delayed promotions, changed schedules, and quietly pushed qualified pilots away from desirable routes. Simone had returned to active flying 4 months earlier to see the culture without the protection of her title. She stopped using the executive entrance, traveled without an assistant, and appeared on crew lists as an ordinary American first officer assigned to flights between Toronto and U.S. destinations. Because the succession had been handled quietly and Simone had avoided advertising, crew roadshows, and public interviews, most frontline employees knew the Carter name but had never seen her in person. Only Evelyn, 2 members of the board's audit committee, the general counsel, and the safety director knew the full plan. The audit committee had approved the inspection, and the safety department had verified that Simone remained fully current and medically fit to fly. Across 12 flights, Simone had encountered dismissive looks, unnecessary questions, and a few strained introductions. Nothing had gone far enough to reveal the system beneath it. Grant had changed that. He had not merely doubted her. He had turned her race and gender into a public safety concern. "I want every record preserved," Simone said. "Crew scheduling recordings, my duty notes, dispatch messages, access history on my employee file, gate camera footage, original passenger videos, and any available cabin audio. Every evaluation Grant has written in the last 8 years." Evelyn began taking notes. "And the pilots he marked as not fitting the culture," Simone continued. "I want their promotion history, schedule changes, retraining orders, and resignations. You already have enough to remove him. I have enough to remove one man. I need to know who taught him he could do this without consequence." Evelyn exhaled slowly. Her anger had not faded, but discipline had replaced urgency. "What do you need from me?" "Send Owen Price. No security. No executive escort. Grant must explain his decision to a normal operations director before he knows who I am." Inside the aircraft, Linda stood beside Tessa in the forward galley. Boarding continued behind them, but the atmosphere had lost its polished rhythm. "Be careful what you write," Linda whispered. "One badly worded report can cost an entire crew its best routes." Tessa looked down at the notes on her tablet. "The wording isn't what caused this." Linda's eyes flicked toward the cockpit. "You don't understand how these reviews work. Then help me understand." Tessa turned the screen toward her. "If we remove the reason from the report, are we keeping the peace or changing the truth?" Linda's lips parted, but no answer came. A moment later, a tall man in a dark operations jacket appeared at the aircraft door. Owen Price stepped aboard, scanned the galley, then looked toward Simone as she returned from the jet bridge. Grant emerged from the cockpit with visible relief. He smiled, pointed toward her, and said, "Good, take her badge and get me a real first officer." Owen Price did not look at Simone. That was deliberate. He stepped into the forward galley, faced Grant, and spoke in the flat tone operations directors used when emotion had contaminated a decision. Start from the beginning. Why are you refusing the assigned first officer? Grant straightened. The presence of a manager restored his confidence. She was placed here to satisfy a diversity target. She lacks command presence, challenges cockpit authority, and has destabilized the crew. I will not put nearly 300 passengers at risk to support an image campaign. Phones remained raised in business class. Owen kept his face unreadable. Did you review her technical record? Grant hesitated. I didn't need to. 30 years in this profession teaches you who has the instincts for the seat. Which procedure did she violate? She refused a direct instruction. Which safety procedure? Grant's jaw tightened. She refused to leave the cockpit when told. Owen let the silence sit there. It stripped the answer of authority and left only its weakness. Did she miss a checklist item? No, misread weather? No, fail a qualification? That is not the point. Then tell me the point. Grant's cheeks darkened. He turned towards Simone and pointed at the badge clipped to her jacket. Collect it. Owen finally looked at him. Captain Mercer, you are removed from command. Hand me your company ID and step off the aircraft. The cabin changed at once. Linda's breath caught. Tessa stopped typing. Leon lowered his phone to watch both men directly. Grant stared at Owen as if the words had arrived in the wrong order. Excuse me? Your company ID now. You're siding with a first officer over a captain with 3 decades of service? I'm removing you from command pending review. Grant laughed, but the sound broke quickly. On whose authority? Owen turned slightly. Miss Carter's authority. Grant's eyes moved to Simone's nameplate, Carter. He had seen the name in succession notices, but had never connected it to the pilot standing before him. Suspicion became recognition, then fear. Owen faced the cabin. Simone Carter is the chief executive officer and controlling shareholder of Liberty Crest Airlines. The words moved through the front rows like a pressure drop. Grant's posture and voice softened immediately. This has been misunderstood. I test unfamiliar crew members. I push them to see how they respond. Simone watched him. You called me unfit before checking my record. I would never have handled it this way if I had known you were the CEO. That is the problem, she said. You believe respect depends on knowing who can punish you. Grant glanced at the phones. We should discuss this privately. You made it public when you questioned my competence over the cabin speakers. Simone did not raise her voice. She addressed Owen instead. Grant was removed from command of Flight 418 immediately. His command authorization would be suspended pending an independent investigation. Linda and the cabin crew members who had directly witnessed the announcement would be removed and interviewed separately. Tessa would be questioned on her own. No senior crew member could influence her statement. A reserve crew would take over, and passengers would be told only that departure was delayed because of a crew change. Owen asked whether Simone intended to operate the flight herself. No, she said. I've been involved in a serious confrontation. Safety requires me to assess my condition by the same standard I would apply to any other pilot. Leon looked at her differently then. Not because she owned the airline, because she refused to use power as a substitute for judgment. Grant unclipped his company ID and placed it in Owen's hand. As he passed Simone, he leaned close enough for only her to hear. You think this ends with me. I know what your board buried before you took over. He walked toward the open aircraft door with an operations supervisor beside him. Simone watched him disappear into the jet bridge. The first battle had ended in full view of the cabin. The real one had just announced itself. By late afternoon, the video from Flight 418 had crossed Canada faster than the aircraft ever could. Most clips showed the full sequence. Grant questioning Simone's qualifications, turning her race and gender into a public warning, then changing his tone the moment he learned who she was. But one anonymous account posted something different. Its version began with Simone saying she would not leave the cockpit and ended with Owen removing Grant from command and taking his company ID. Everything before her refusal, including Grant's announcement to the passengers, was gone. The caption called Simone an American executive who had secretly entered frontline operations to test employees. then used ownership power to punish a captain who challenged her. Within hours, that shortened version had been shared by commentators who knew little about aviation and even less about what had happened in Toronto. Grant appeared that evening beside Union Representative Carl Dwyer. He wore a dark suit instead of his uniform, but kept the calm, wounded expression of a man presenting himself as the injured party. "I raised a safety concern," he said. "I was removed because corporate leadership now values politics over a captain's judgment." He never mentioned rejecting a black reserve pilot. He never explained why a white first officer with fewer hours had been acceptable. 2 days later, his attorneys filed a claim seeking $40 million US. They alleged improper removal from duty, age discrimination, interference with cockpit authority, damage to professional reputation, and deliberate entrapment through Simone's undercover inspection. Then they released part of her call with Evelyn. The call had passed through Liberty Crest's recorded executive incident line, and someone with internal access had copied a short segment before the preservation order locked the system. The recording contained one sentence: "I need to see how many people will protect him." Cut away from the rest of the conversation, it sounded less like evidence preservation and more like a trap waiting to close. At Liberty Crest's Canadian regional headquarters in downtown Toronto, the board met behind glass walls while reporters crowded the lobby below. The airline was negotiating a refinancing package worth nearly $4 billion US. Investors had already called twice that morning, asking whether the company was stable enough to complete it. 3 directors wanted Simone to issue a public statement attacking Grant's character and defending every decision she had made. She refused. "If I control the investigation and the public response, then his accusation becomes harder to disprove," she said. One director leaned back, frustration tightening his face. "You are asking us to surrender the narrative. I'm asking us not to replace one abuse of authority with another." Simone formally removed herself from the disciplinary panel and requested an outside investigation led by independent aviation and employment specialists. Evelyn understood the cost before the vote began. The board approved the investigation, then temporarily limited Simone's direct authority over personnel decisions connected to the case. She remained CEO, but for the first time since taking control of Liberty Crest, she could not decide who would be suspended, interviewed, or protected. The restraint she had chosen now felt like a locked door. Grant's attorney sent a settlement proposal that evening. If Liberty Crest paid a confidential amount, restored part of his status, and described the confrontation as a misunderstanding, he would withdraw the lawsuit and stop speaking publicly. Evelyn placed the document between them. "Are you prepared to lose the chief executive role over this?" Simone looked through the office window at Toronto's wet evening streets. For several seconds, she said nothing. Elsewhere, Tessa opened her new schedule and felt the message before she finished reading it. Her preferred routes were gone. She had been moved to short-notice reserve shifts, multi-leg days, and lower credit routes that reduced both her income and her promotion record. No document called it retaliation. That was what made it effective. Linda called her before midnight. "Answer only what investigators ask," she said. "Don't introduce race unless they bring it up first." Tessa sat still, listening to the fear beneath Linda's advice. "But race is part of what happened." Linda lowered her voice. "Truth doesn't always protect the person who tells it." At nearly the same hour, Dana Whitaker reviewed the company's access logs. One employee account had entered the evaluation archive after midnight and attempted to delete a folder labeled Command Readiness Concerns. Dana restored the directory, opened the first file, and saw Grant Mercer's name repeated across years of reviews. Dana Whitaker restored the deleted folder before sunrise. The archive contained evaluations from 19 pilots who had flown with Grant Mercer over 8 years. At first glance, nothing looked dramatic. No slurs, no open threats, just the polished language of professional judgment. Dana ignored the adjectives and compared the events beneath them. In one report, a white male first officer had ordered a go-around after crosswinds exceeded the stabilized approach limit. Grant praised him as decisive under pressure with strong command instinct. 14 months later, A black first officer made the same decision under nearly identical conditions. Grant called him overly cautious and wrote that he challenges captain authority. Another pair of files told the same story. A white first officer questioned the planned fuel reserve and received praise for healthy cockpit dialogue. A black woman raised the same concern and became argumentative and emotionally rigid. Dana spread the reports across a conference table, then added simulator scores, safety records, and recurrent training results. The pilots Grant had marked as weak did not perform worse. Several scored higher than the people he recommended for promotion. The pattern was not hidden. It had simply been separated into enough files that no one had been forced to see it whole. One name appeared repeatedly: Isaiah Reed. 3 years earlier, Isaiah had been first officer on an approach into Denver when a wind shear alert sounded. Grant wanted to continue. Isaiah insisted on a missed approach and later filed a safety report. 2 weeks afterward, Grant described him as difficult, resistant to command, and unready for promotion. Isaiah remained a first officer, while less experienced pilots moved ahead of him. Simone met him in a small conference room at Liberty Crest's Toronto regional office. No attorneys, no cameras. Rain pressed softly against the Toronto windows. Isaiah entered carrying a thin folder and sat across from her without offering gratitude. His restraint felt heavier than anger. Why did the company need this to happen to its CEO before it believed the rest of us? He asked. Simone had prepared explanations about incomplete reports and the difficulty of proving patterns. None survived the question. She remembered reading Isaiah's complaint months earlier and marking it for further review. Further review had become another form of delay. It shouldn't have, she said. But it did. Isaiah watched her for a moment. Then don't make Grant the whole story. The words stayed with her after he left. Accountability would mean more than removing one captain. It would mean admitting the company had mistaken repeated harm for isolated conflict because that conclusion was easier. That afternoon, Leon Briggs contacted the independent team. He provided the complete recording from Flight 418 and identified himself as a retired airline captain who had spent 12 years training crews in accident prevention. His statement was precise. Simone never raised her voice. Grant refused a competency review. He made passengers doubt her before naming any technical failure. He turned resistance to his prejudice into a supposed safety threat. Tessa submitted her time log and the original report she had written before anyone advised her to soften it. Together, the evidence showed not a misunderstanding but a sequence of choices. Dana then found an internal message from a senior operations manager to human resources. Do not touch Mercer. He protects our on-time numbers. Access logs showed that the same manager's credentials had been used to copy Simone's call with Evelyn and to attempt the midnight deletion of the Command Readiness Concerns folder. The sentence changed the investigation. Grant had not operated outside the system. The company had rewarded the results his methods produced and looked away from the cost. The restored folder was the material Grant had referred to when he warned Simone that the board had buried something before she took over. Near evening, Dana received notice from Grant's legal team. Linda Shore would testify that Simone had entered the cockpit confrontational, challenged Grant from the beginning, and deliberately provoked the dispute. Simone read the notice twice. She did not feel betrayed yet. She felt something quieter and more painful. Linda had watched the truth happen. Now fear was preparing to rewrite it, and this time the evidence would not disappear quietly. The independent hearing opened on a gray Monday morning in a rented conference room near Toronto Pearson. Simone sat at the far end of the table with no voting rights and no authority over the panel. For the first time since taking control of Liberty Crest, she entered a room where her title could not decide the outcome. Grant arrived with 2 attorneys and Carl Dwyer from the pilots' union. He wore a dark suit, his expression composed, almost injured. I have flown with people from every background, he told the panel. This was never about race. Ms. Carter used her identity and corporate position to turn a professional disagreement into a public crisis. My only concern was passenger safety. One attorney placed Linda Shore's original report on the screen. It described the event as a disagreement between captain and first officer regarding command authority. There was no mention of the corporate image remark, Grant's refusal to test Simone's qualifications, or his request for a white male replacement. Linda was called in shortly after noon. She sat with both hands folded tightly in her lap. "Do you stand by your report?" the panel chair asked. Linda glanced toward Grant, then toward Simone. "Yes. As I remember it, tensions rose on both sides. What words did Captain Mercer use? I don't recall exactly." Dana Whitaker said nothing at first. She pressed a button, and the scheduling call filled the room. Grant's voice sounded clean through the speaker. The scheduler offered Jamal Brooks, a qualified black reserve pilot. Grant rejected him before hearing his experience. Seconds later, the scheduler offered Eric Caldwell, a white first officer with fewer 787 hours. "Send him," Grant said on the recording. No one moved. Tessa then presented her time log. Each entry matched the call, the cockpit notes, and the cabin announcement. Finally, Leon Briggs' unedited video appeared on the screen. Linda watched herself standing beside Grant while he described Simone as a corporate image experiment before hundreds of passengers. She watched herself look down when Simone asked whether a white male pilot would have been told to wait outside. She watched the moment she chose silence. Dana turned to her. "Did you leave the race-coded remarks out because you did not hear them, or because writing them would have forced you to act?" Linda's face tightened. The room waited. Grant's attorney shifted in his chair, preparing to object, but Linda spoke first. "I heard it." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I had heard versions of it before." She admitted Grant once described another black pilot as someone who did not fit the airline's command image. She had also seen white first officers praised for challenging decisions, while black pilots were called difficult for doing the same thing. Linda did not ask for sympathy. "I knew it was wrong," she said. "I told myself silence kept the crew together. It only kept him protected." Dana displayed two evaluations side by side. The first praised a white pilot for ordering a go-around in unsafe wind. The second criticized a black pilot for making the same call under similar conditions. "They made the same decision," Dana said. "Why was one leadership and the other insubordination?" Grant leaned back. "Pilot evaluation cannot be reduced to numbers. Experience allows a captain to see qualities that data misses. Then explain what you saw," Dana replied, "without mentioning their race, gender, personality, or your own discomfort." Grant looked at the reports. He spoke about instinct, presence, and authority, but he could not name one technical failure. Carl Dwyer slowly closed the folder in front of him. "The union requests a recess to review the complete record." Grant turned sharply. "Now you want a recess?" His composure cracked. He looked toward the panel, anger rising into his voice. "You all knew how I operated. You rewarded me for it." Silence followed. The statement did not excuse him. It exposed how Liberty Crest had praised his on-time record, ignored repeated complaints, and benefited from the fear he created. The panel now faced a harder question than whether Grant deserved discipline. It had to decide whether the company would reveal its own role or sacrifice one captain and pretend the system had been innocent. The independent panel delivered its final report 3 weeks later. Liberty Crest could have released a shortened version, removed the names of senior managers, and described Grant Mercer as one employee who had violated company values. The board considered doing exactly that. Evelyn Hart rejected the proposal. "If we publish only the part that protects us," she said, "we prove the report's point." The full document went public the following morning. It concluded that Grant had refused to work with a fully qualified first officer before reviewing her technical record. He had applied different standards to pilots from different backgrounds, used subjective language to delay promotions, treated professional disagreement as insubordination, pressured crew members to soften safety reports, and questioned Simone's competence before passengers without identifying a single unsafe act. The report also named the managers who had ignored earlier complaints because Grant protected the airline's on-time performance. The truth did not arrive cleanly. It brought legal exposure, angry investors, and headlines Liberty Crest could not control. At the final employment meeting, Grant sat across from the board with his attorneys. The confidence he once carried into the cockpit had narrowed into a rigid stillness. 30 years, he said. I gave this airline 30 years. Evelyn studied him without satisfaction. Seniority is history. It is not evidence of good judgment. Grant's employment was terminated. His internal captain authorization was withdrawn, and the findings were sent to the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, with Transport Canada, notified because the incident occurred at Toronto Pearson. He kept the pension benefits he had legally earned, but he lost his command, his position, and any immediate path back to the flight deck, while the FAA reviewed whether his airman certificate required further action. His attorneys withdrew the $40 million lawsuit after the complete recordings and evaluation files entered the legal record. Carl Dwyer faced reporters outside union headquarters 2 days later. His apology was brief and uncomfortable. He admitted the union had defended seniority before examining evidence and promised that experience would no longer be used as a shield against discrimination complaints. Linda Shore received a 2-month demotion from lead cabin duties, mandatory intervention training, and a formal probation period. Her corrected testimony had mattered, but it did not erase the years she had stayed quiet. When Owen informed her, Linda nodded without arguing. The consequence hurt. She also knew it was smaller than the cost others had paid for her silence. Tessa's original schedule was restored. Investigators concluded that moving her to poorer routes had been retaliatory. The manager who approved the changes was suspended pending a separate review. 2 executives who had dismissed Isaiah Reed's complaint and similar reports were removed from their positions, including the senior operations manager tied to the leaked call excerpt and the midnight deletion attempt. Simone's full executive authority was restored after the panel found no evidence that she had staged the confrontation or manipulated the investigation. The report did not clear her completely. It stated that Liberty Crest's leadership, including Simone's administration, had responded too slowly to warning signs already inside the company. At the board meeting where her authority was returned, several directors waited for her to defend herself. She did not. That finding is fair, she said. The words unsettled the room more than denial would have. Simone did not treat the outcome as a personal victory. She invited Isaiah, Tessa, and several pilots whose complaints had been dismissed to help design the new reporting and promotion system. We made decisions about you without listening to you, she told them. We won't repair that by doing it again. In the first month after the report, internal complaints increased sharply. A few board members saw the numbers and panicked. They argued the public disclosure had damaged morale and encouraged employees to label every disagreement as bias. Simone read the reports differently. More employees were attaching names, preserving evidence, and questioning senior captains without believing that one report would end their careers. The company did not suddenly have more problems. For the first time, people trusted someone might hear them. 6 months after the hearing, Liberty Crest looked much the same from the terminal windows. Aircraft still moved through Toronto Pearson beneath gray morning skies. Gate agents still watched clocks. Crews still carried coffee into briefings and complained about weather delays. The change lived in places passengers could not see. Simulator data and recorded decision points were assigned coded identification numbers and reviewed by an evaluator who could not see the pilot's name, photograph, race, or gender. A captain could remove a first officer immediately for an urgent safety threat, but the specific reason had to be documented and independently reviewed as soon as the aircraft was secure. Failed evaluations required a second reviewer, and a new monitoring system flagged assessors, whose ratings repeatedly fell hardest on the same groups of employees. Reports of misconduct went directly to the board's safety committee. Scheduling managers could no longer change routes, reserve assignments, or promotion opportunities without review after an employee filed a complaint. On-time performance remained important, but it could no longer erase missing reports or reward crews for hiding problems. The reforms did not make every conversation comfortable. They made avoidance harder. Linda Shore learned that difference during an intervention training session near the airport. She sat among newly hired flight attendants rather than standing before them as an expert. Her lead attendant insignia had been returned after probation, but she wore it without the confidence it once gave her. When the instructor asked why witnesses stayed silent, Linda told them about Flight 412. She described standing close enough to hear the truth and still hoping Simone would step outside so everyone else could remain comfortable. She did not blame Grant for her own choice. Silence did not keep the peace, she said. It kept the wrong person comfortable. At the back of the room, Tessa listened with her arms folded. She did not applaud when Linda finished. After several quiet seconds, Tessa gave her a small nod. Linda returned it. Nothing was fully repaired, but the truth had finally been acknowledged. That same morning, Simone reported for Liberty Crest Flight 426 from Toronto to San Francisco. She entered through the crew entrance in uniform, carrying the same worn flight bag she had brought aboard Flight 418. 6 months of hearings, headlines, and policy meetings had not removed the tension she felt as she approached a cockpit door. Memory had its own weather. It could clear for weeks, then return without warning. Captain Aaron Cho was already in the left seat, reviewing the departure package. He had flown for more than 20 years and had never worked directly with Simone. When she entered, his attention went first to the tablet in front of him, where her proposed diversion plan was open. Then he stood and offered his hand. "First Officer Carter, I reviewed your weather diversion plan. Good call." Simone felt something loosen quietly in her chest. Aaron did not ask who had assigned her. He did not inspect her badge twice. He did not look toward headquarters for permission to trust the record in front of him. Simone placed her bag beside the right seat and sat down. Aaron pointed to a storm band shifting west across the route. "Would you increase the reserve?" "I would," she said. "If the coastal weather closes San Francisco, Oakland gives us the shortest option, but Sacramento gives us more room if conditions deteriorate across the Bay Area." Aaron studied the chart. "I was leaning toward Oakland. So was I, unless the entire Bay Area closes down." He considered that, then nodded. "Let's run both before we decide." No one called her disagreement combative. No one treated his authority as fragile. They reviewed the weather, fuel, alternates, and departure restrictions until both were satisfied. Before the cockpit door closed, Tessa, assigned to Flight 426 and now serving on the Employee Safety Advisory Council, appeared with the latest culture report. The report showed that response times had fallen sharply and that fewer employees feared retaliation, even though reporting volume remained high. Simone folded the report and placed it in her flight bag. Beyond the windshield, rain had just stopped. Sunlight spread across the wet runway, turning the pavement into a strip of silver. Aaron began the checklist. Simone answered. The cockpit door closed behind them. This time, no one asked who had allowed her inside. Did Simone handle Grant the right way, or should she have acted sooner? Like, subscribe, and tell us which moments stayed with you and where you're watching from.